We're back in the studio for episode 232 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Tuesday afternoon with me here in New York. Once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. One of the greatest movies ever made, not an exaggeration, Alfred Hitchcock's North by Northwest just celebrated its 65th birthday. It was released to theaters on July 1st, 1959. It was an immediate hit with critics and audiences, and it is certainly a film, as with most of the Hitchcock classics, which has stood the test of time. Even if there are certain dated elements, because how could there not be dated elements, a movie that's now 65 years old, or in the case of another extraordinary Hitchcock film, Rear Window, 70 years old. The films have incredible rewatchability factor, and in many cases, they still seem to be speaking to today. And it was really the genius of Hitchcock, a man who had a dark side of that genius and to that genius, but who nevertheless was a visionary and pioneered so many different things. When you think about it, he made the first modern horror film. It was his next movie after North by Northwest, Psycho. North by Northwest could be called the kind of granddaddy of all spy thrillers. It's James Bond before James Bond. And it's one of Hollywood's first up-tempo action thrillers of its type. Now, they were limited, and Quentin Tarantino has kind of joked about this, that Hitchcock was limited by the fact that he clearly wanted to make naughtier movies than he was allowed to. He really pushed the envelope with Psycho, but there are moments in North by Northwest, there are a few conversations between Cary Grant and Eva Marie Saint that I'm a little surprised that the censors didn't balk, even though it was Sir Alfred involved. He was willing and delighted in going as far as he was allowed and sometimes taking his chances, as is the case with Psycho, where he clearly was relying on how much respect the industry had for him and how big of a name he already was, that he was going to be able to get away with shit that no other filmmaker could possibly have gotten away with. Specifically, the great Michael Powell made a movie, Peeping Tom, right around the same time as Psycho. Similar themes: crazy killer, mad dog, lunatic killer, perverted, twisted, fucked up killer. Michael Powell's career was pretty much destroyed. Alfred Hitchcock's star continued to rise through Psycho. North by Northwest was a substantial hit at the box office, grossing around 10 million. I don't know where they come up with those numbers. I know that the record keeping was not as accurate 65 years ago as it is now. But it is a film that I read about and know was heavily discussed and loved from when I was a small boy. And this is neither here nor there, but I am a diehard New York Yankees baseball fan. And I remember reading a piece about Phil Rizzuto, the late, great Yankee shortstop, Hall of Famer, who won so many World Series as a player starting in 1941. And he was on the team in the 1956 season when they cut him. But he won a lot of World Series as a player, and then he won a lot more as the Yankees' primary play-by-play radio and TV announcer. Phil Rizzuto's favorite movie of all time is Alfred Hitchcock's North by Northwest. He was already, Phil that is, the broadcaster for the team, and the Yankees were on a trip through the Midwest to play teams like then Kansas City Athletics. According to legend, in a 10-game road trip, Phil Rizzuto saw North by Northwest 7 times. That's dedication. That is someone who really likes a certain movie 7 times in a week and a half. And Phil Rizzuto's famous call was, "Holy cow." And he called people Sometimes it was good. Usually it was good. Sometimes it was a little bit negative. You would call them a huckleberry. But Phil Rizzuto, watching Alfred Hitchcock's North by Northwest 7 times in 10 days, holy cow, what a huckleberry. Now, I mentioned James Bond, and there are rumors, and there seem to be some confirmed reports that Ian Fleming himself, who wrote the original James Bond novels, loved Alfred Hitchcock's North by Northwest and took inspiration, and it gave him ideas of certain directions he could go in. Now, it's not random that someone such as myself points out similarities or says, well, this was kind of the granddaddy of all spy movies, or that this gave inspiration to, or that this movie plays like a spy thriller, even though the main character is not a spy. The old saying, though, if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, I guess it's a duck. And in the world of North by Northwest, this is not a surrealist film like Hitchcock occasionally, like movies such as Spellbound, get into a little bit of surrealist stuff. This movie is presented at surface and ground level as far as the characters. The main character, who Cary Grant plays so brilliantly. And when people think of Cary Grant, well, he just played Cary Grant. They're thinking of this movie. This is his most visible film. And the phrase, playing Cary Grant, it means suave, debonair, sound like James Bond? Yeah. Suave, debonair, lady killer, sound like James Bond. Unflappable. Now, early in the story, Roger O. Thornhill is very flappable because he's not a spy. He's a New York City advertising executive. He's Mad Men. He's that guy. This could be the John Hamm character from the TV show, or one of his cohorts. This is a guy who has made good money, probably for as far back as he can remember, has a very comfortable life, was a shitty husband not once, but twice, from what we can gather. Life is easy. Life is fun. Women are playthings. He's got a good life, Roger O. Thornhill, as we meet him. New York City. And in a nod to old Hollywood, which at the time was not old Hollywood, it was just Hollywood, you have a wonderful actress, Jessie Royce Landis, playing Cary Grant's mom. Now, out of context, doesn't mean anything. Because if I'd come on here and said, his mom is played by Maria Ospinskaya, you'd say, okay. Name sounds familiar. She was in a lot of the old Universal horror films of the 30s, Maria Ospinskaya. But me just throwing this out at you, saying that Jessie Royce Landis plays Roger's mom, okay. Don't know the name. But if you're talking about her, she must be good. Well, yeah, she is good. However, there's always been talk of ageism and age-related absurdity in Hollywood. Mary Astor, in The Maltese Falcon, 1941, she plays femme fatale. She's the Kathleen Turner in Body Heat. Gloria Graham in A Lonely Place. Lauren Bacall in To Have and Have Not. Mary Astor is playing that role in The Maltese Falcon. And a couple of years later, she's playing a school marm. She's playing a school marm. In 1955, 4 years before North by Northwest, Cary Grant plays a retired jewel thief named John Roby, who might be back in action. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. There's a string of jewel robberies on the French Riviera. It must be him. He's the cat. He's the famous cat burglar. Well, he meets 2 women, a mother and a daughter, a duo. And I think that our charming Cary is getting ideas to maybe take both of them. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But Grace Kelly was about 22, maybe 23 at the time, and her mom, played by Jessie Royce Landis. Jessie Royce Landis is very age appropriate for Cary Grant's John Roby. And she seems to be flashing $1 million smiles at him. And maybe he can just get with the mom, but he's not interested in the mom. He wants Grace Kelly. No offense to Jessie Royce Landis, but she is presented as a love interest to Cary Grant's John Roby in 1955's To Catch a Thief, the movie which unfortunately, from a cinematic history perspective, is the reason why Grace Kelly didn't make any more movies. Because while shooting that film in the French Riviera, she met who? Prince Rainier. And she did what? She became Princess Grace. She actually was a princess. For those of you who wondered, why was she called Princess Grace? Who's buried in Grant's tomb? Grant. Why was Grace Kelly called Princess Grace? Because she was a princess. 1 + 1 = 2. Jessie Royce Landis presented as a potential love interest in 1955. In 1959's North by Northwest, she plays Roger O. Thornhill's mom. His mom. She wanted to have sexual relations with him 4 years earlier, and now she's playing his mom. And in real life, I think she was either 3 or 4 years older than Cary Grant. Somehow it works. Although she doesn't look anywhere near old enough to be his mom. I guess the movie is telling us she's playing older and he's playing younger. Cary's probably supposed to be closer to 40, and I guess Jessie is supposed to be 60-ish when this movie is made. But that's Hollywood. And 36, 37 years later, Goldie Hawn in The First Wives Club, there's a Gen X standard, right? Goldie and Bette Midler and Diane Keaton. Or as Bette famously said at the 1997 Academy Awards when they presented what I think was Best Musical Score, First Wives go to the Oscars. And then both Bette and Goldie turned to Diane and said, "Darling, we both voted for you." And Diane Keaton was so embarrassed. She'd been nominated for a not very good movie called Marvin's Room, where she basically takes a film from Meryl Streep, puts it on her back, and runs away with it. The movie's not that good. But in that film, in First Wives Club, Goldie Hawn, who plays an actress who is of a certain age, points out the obvious. We've always known this. Cary Grant can hook up with a 25-year-old from the time he is age 25 until he's in his 60s. But if you're an actress in Hollywood, whether you look like Goldie Hawn, whether you are a great actress like a Meryl Streep, like a Glenn Close, there's only 3 kinds of roles for you in Hollywood. As Jessie Royce Landis found out, there were actually only 2. But 3 kinds of roles in Hollywood. Babe, district attorney, driving Miss Daisy. Jessie Royce Landis went straight from, I guess, kind of Babe to driving Miss Daisy in 4 years. Hollywood for you. And I know Hitchcock, he had to have gotten a kick out of the casting. He did it deliberately. He knew people were going to be like, well, what the fuck is this? He didn't care. So Roger O. Thornhill, successful, hard-charging, bullshit artist, Manhattan executive, is having one of those martini lunches or martini cocktail hours with a couple of potential clients. And he's in the Oak Room at, was it the Hotel Esplanade? It's one of the big hotels. It might as well be the Waldorf. And he needs to send a cable to his mother. His mom, who seems to run a significant portion of his life. It's kind of pathetic. But he needs to send a cable to his mother because he's given his secretary information, which is bad information, but he needs to get something to his mom. Mother, I won't be home for dinner. Whatever it is, he has to tell her. And he raises his hand at the wrong time. He just happens to put his hand up to try to get the kid to come over so he can send a cable. And these 2 guys, we don't know, we haven't seen them in the first part of the movie. They're just standing there in the Oak Room where Cary is about to try to enjoy a couple of cocktails with his buddies, his cronies, business associates. Puts his hand up at the wrong time. And the next thing you know, he is taken, not by choice, he's taken to the Glen Cove Mansion. They don't identify it as the Glen Cove Mansion in the film, but that's where he goes. He's taken to the Glen Cove Mansion, and he meets with another brilliant actor, James Mason, Lester Townsend, who appears to be a multi-millionaire also involved in some kind of international skullduggery. There's a great word that should come back into vogue. I bet you if you're under 40, you've never heard the word skullduggery. But Lester Townsend appears to be involved in all manner of skullduggery. And Roger keeps getting referred to as Mr. Kaplan. Well, I don't know who Mr. Kaplan is, but your guys here somehow mistook me for somebody else. My name is Roger O. Thornhill. Okay, Mr. Kaplan, that's how you want to play it? That's how we'll play it. So, he is mistaken simply because he put his hand in the air at the worst possible time. Because the two henchmen, stoolies, the two henchmen had someone in the hotel announce, Mr. Kaplan, Mr. George Kaplan. And we don't know who that is, but they had it announced, and Roger's hand went up at the same time. It had nothing to do with the name Kaplan, but he put his hand up, and these two fucking idiots think that it's him. Hence why he's brought in, and why Lester Townsend keeps calling him Kaplan. So Cary Grant, as Roger Thornhill, they're convinced that he is this apparent globe-trotting super spy, a la James Bond. You keep calling yourself Roger O. Thornhill. You have the appropriate instruments and documents that suggest you're Thornhill. That's your cover, Mr. Kaplan. Clearly, that's your cover. Well, it's not his cover, it's who he is. The more that he fights against this idiotic idea that he is this globe-trotting super spy, the more it seems like he really is this globe-trotting super spy. You're in his hotel room. You're answering his phone. Why would you even run from it? We know who you are. Let's do some business. We don't want to kill you. We don't want any harm for you, Mr. Kaplan. Just the way James Mason says, Mr. Kaplan, Mr. Kaplan. And Martin Landau, another incredible actor who is so good in the movie Rounders, one of my favorites. And he won an Oscar for 1994's Ed Wood, the Tim Burton film about the worst filmmaker who ever worked in any way associated with the studio system in Hollywood, Edward D. Wood Jr. Martin Landau played Bela Lugosi, walked away with the Oscar. Ed Wood, very underappreciated. I don't want to say underrated, it's underseen relative to Tim Burton's career and the fact that Johnny Depp, it's easily a top 5 best Johnny Depp performance in that film. And Landau just crushes it playing Bela Lugosi. But in this film, in North by Northwest, Martin Landau is very young, and he plays the James Mason, who is essentially the big bad, plays his right-hand man, literally. Leonard. Even the way James Mason says the name Leonard, almost like Leonard Skinner. Leonard. Oh, Leonard, I'm touched. Truly I am. Roger Thornhill cannot escape the shadow of George Kaplan. And Hitchcock, in true Hitchcock fashion, the Hitchcock wasn't always that interested in maintaining surprises or what we would call plot twists. He wasn't obsessed with them. This was not M. Night Shyamalan with some huge twist at the end. North by Northwest, spoiler alert, relatively early in the film, we are taken to a Washington, D.C. location where some kind of an alphabet soup agency, is it the CIA, is it the FBI, is it the OSI, one of the alphabet soups, are discussing what's happened here where this random guy, this Roger Thornhill, apparently is in advertising. These fucking idiots think that he's George Kaplan. And then one of the alphabet soup guys goes, how could he be mistaken for somebody who doesn't exist? Well, George Kaplan was a fictional construct created by the alphabet soups so that the real agent could work undercover and under the cloak of secrecy because they're going to keep looking for George Kaplan. They're convinced that George Kaplan is real and a threat to them when there is no George Kaplan. So we as the audience, similar to in Vertigo, this one I won't spoil, but in Vertigo, about halfway through the film, We are given a humongous piece of narrative information that James Stewart's hero does not know. We are ahead of the characters. And that's another thing that in most Hollywood films, you don't do that. You don't put the audience 10 miles ahead of the main character. But here in North by Northwest, it adds to the suspense because there is a big scene, and it's the most famous scene in the film, where Cary Grant goes to an abandoned, like a bus stop in the middle of fucking nowhere. It looks like it's 90 degrees and it hasn't rained since the days of Moses. Not exaggerating there either. But we as the audience know, the alphabet soups have told us there's no George Kaplan. If Cary is going to meet George Kaplan, I think somebody's going to try to bump him off because there is no George Kaplan. What do you mean there's no George Kaplan? I've been in his hotel room. He's got short sleeves and dandruff. They went so far as to create a fictitious character who apparently has the arms of a person who's about 4'11", and he's probably supposed to be 6 feet. And somehow George Kaplan has dandruff. But there is no George Kaplan. And Cary Grant gets sent to a meeting by Eva Marie Saint's character, Miss Kendall. And we know it can't go well. So we as the audience, unlike a normal spy thriller, James Bond has had plenty of meetings that went awry. Other spies, Roy Scheider in Marathon Man as Scylla, a globe-trotting super spy. There are meetings that go very much awry in that film. We know that this is going to be bad. We just don't know how. And the how is that Cary Grant is literally chased by a fucking plane. A crop duster plane chases Cary Grant. And when we think of most famous scenes ever, the crop dusting sequence in North by Northwest makes a lot of top 10 lists. Certainly would make mine. I mean, it's been parodied and aped on so many TV shows. I think Family Guy did it at least 3 times. That Peter Griffin is running away a la Roger O. Thornhill. But what's interesting, on top of the obvious that the story is really engaging, there's a lot of humorous beats, and there are a lot of moments of pretty intense and significant tension, because we don't really know who's on whose side at what point, if at all. Cary Grant starts the film on defense. He's in retreat because there are things taking place which cannot be taking place. This can't be right. This is not really Lester Townsend. Well, how the fuck is he in Lester Townsend's house? What is happening here? What goes on here? He is chased all over the country in a north by northwesterly direction, more or less. At a certain point, he gets tired of being fucked with and pushed around. And he figures, everybody thinks I'm Kaplan, the head of the alphabet soup that I guess I'm working with now. He tells me to continue being this make-believe agent. So you know what? Fuck it. This motherfucker, the character that he thought was Lester Townsend, the James Mason character, who's actually, his name is Philip Van Damme, he's so sure that I'm George Kaplan and I'm this globe-trotting, dangerous spy. Fuck him. 2 can play at that game. And Cary starts using his considerable charisma, intelligence, to start threatening him right back. And Cary Grant, so collegial, so smart, so humorous and charismatic and debonair, has moments of pure ice where he all but spits vitriol at Eva Marie Saint's Miss Kendall when she goes to slap him as if he's offended her. The single greatest line reading of Cary Grant's career. She goes to slap him. He stops her. Who are you kidding? You have no feelings to hurt. It is as pitch black as any line reading in any James Bond film. And Cary delivers it so perfectly. Can't teach it in an acting class, what Cary Grant does really throughout this film. But there are these moments where we almost get the chills that he is assuming the mantle of this character seamlessly. I tried it your way. I tried to convince you that I'm not this guy. You insisted on continuing to fuck with me, try to bump me off, threaten me. Well, you know what? Fuck you. He doesn't say that, but it's basically a gigantic fuck you. You better watch out for yourself. Because if you don't do what I say, if you don't agree to my terms, I'm going to get you. I'm coming to get you. And these are the moments when we think of James Bond films, because there are Bond movies where he is not who he seems to be. He usually doesn't change his name. But for example, License to Kill, the second of the two Timothy Dalton films, he says his name is Bond, but he doesn't let them know exactly who he is. And that's how he's able to maintain the illusion. North by Northwest, he's forced to maintain the illusion that he is a character that does not and never has existed. He does it. He does it marvelously. He does it well enough that you can sense Van Damme's fear. The scene at Mount Rushmore. Because now, this guy who kept telling us for how long that he's really some other guy, a random guy named Roger Thornhill, now he's threatening us. This guy might be dangerous. Yeah, well, you made him that way. You turned him into a super spy. The accidental spy, Roger O. Thornhill. Do we really think it's a coincidence? Thornhill plays most of the movie in a suit. He's doing action movie stuff, wearing what would have to be a very expensive suit, a la James Bond, saving the world in a tuxedo and a $100,000 Omega wristwatch. Great moments of product placement in movies. Generation Xers remember that incredible scene in Wayne's World. Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Doritos, whatever. Great moments of movie history. Casino Royale, Daniel Craig diving. Eva Green asks him about his watch, and he's almost talking to the audience, and he goes, Omega. That's the kind of advertising I would say you can't buy, but they actually did buy it. North by Northwest is the forerunner to James Bond. Even though its lead is not really a spy, he kind of learns how to become a spy, and kicking and screaming is fighting the idea that he is a spy until he realizes if you can't beat him, join him. Fuck them all. And Cary Grant is really extraordinary. Now, I would argue his two best performances, this is one, and the screwball comedy performance opposite Katharine Hepburn in Bringing Up Baby is the other. You want to talk about two masterclasses in film acting. Cary Grant was not necessarily known as having that much dramatic range, but he was funny as hell. And if you compare what he does in Bringing Up Baby to what he does in North by Northwest almost 2 decades later, or more than 2 decades, 2 decades, 1939, 1959, you marvel at just how much talent this guy had, how great he was, how underappreciated. How did he not win an Academy Award for Best Actor? Give me a fucking break. He should have won for Bringing Up Baby. He should have won for the Philadelphia Story. They somehow gave it to his buddy James Stewart, even though James Stewart gets acted off the screen by Cary Grant as C.K. Dexter Haven. His performance as Roger O. Thornhill is his masterstroke, his finest hour in cinema. This has been episode 232 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mindcast. A happy 65th Senior Citizen Day and Senior Citizen Birthday to North by Northwest, starring Cary Grant, Eva Marie Saint, James Mason, Martin Landau, and Jesse Royce Landis. And if you checked out episode 232 on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you check out this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with episode 233 real soon. Until then,